You know that moment when you're standing in line at the grocery store watching someone ahead of you count out exact change for a pack of gum, and you think to yourself, man, I remember when $5 felt like real money. Well, what if I told you that the same $5 most people thoughtlessly spend on their daily coffee could literally transform their entire financial future? Not in some get-rich-quick fantasy way, but through actual mathematics that most people never bother to learn. My name is Alex, and about 15 years ago, I was that guy in the expensive suit rushing through Manhattan, managing other people's millions while somehow never managing to build real wealth myself. I was making what most people would consider serious money in investment banking. But I was also spending it just as fast as it came in. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was helping wealthy clients grow their fortunes while my own bank account looked like a roller coaster designed by someone with serious commitment issues. Then something clicked. Not some dramatic revelation or life-changing event, just a simple realization that the math I was using to make my clients wealthy was the same math available to literally everyone. The difference wasn't access to secret investment opportunities or insider knowledge. The difference was understanding how small, consistent actions compound over time in ways that defy most people's intuition about money. These days, I spend my time studying wealth creation patterns and mentoring people who want to understand the real mechanics behind building substantial wealth. And what I've discovered might surprise you. The gap between financial struggle and financial freedom isn't nearly as wide as most people think. In fact, it's exactly $100 per week wide. Now, before you start thinking this is another one of those skip your morning latte and retire rich lectures, let me be clear about something. This isn't about depriving yourself or living like a monk. This is about understanding a mathematical reality that most people completely miss. When you grasp this concept, and I mean really understand it at a gut level, it changes how you see every financial decision for the rest of your life. Here's what's fascinating about human psychology and money. Most people can easily visualize spending $100. They can picture exactly what that amount buys. A nice dinner out, a few items of clothing, maybe a small gadget they've been wanting. But ask those same people to visualize what $100 per week becomes over 20 years and their brains just shut down. The numbers become abstract, meaningless, impossible to grasp. This is where most people make their biggest financial mistake. They focus on what money can buy today instead of what money can become tomorrow. They see $100 as purchasing power rather than wealth-building power. And that shift in perspective, that one simple change in how you think about money, is literally worth hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime. Let me paint you a picture of two different financial realities. Both start with the exact same person, same income, same expenses, same life circumstances. The only difference is how they think about $100 per week. Person A sees that money as spending power. Maybe they use it for entertainment, convenience purchases, small luxuries that make life a little more enjoyable. Nothing wrong with that approach, by the way. Life should be enjoyed. Person B sees that same $100 differently. They see it as a wealth-building tool. Instead of spending it, they invest it. Week after week, month after month, year after year. Same discipline, same commitment, but completely different destination. Fast forward 20 years, and these two people are living in completely different financial universes. Person A has enjoyed thousands of small pleasures over the years but has no substantial wealth to show for it. Person B has built something that most people would consider impossible. They've created real, substantial wealth using nothing but patience, consistency, and basic mathematics. The exact numbers might shock you. We're not talking about modest improvements to your financial situation. We're talking about the difference between financial stress and financial freedom, between working because you have to and working because you want to, between worrying about money and having money work for you. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something that changed my entire perspective on wealth building. The transformation isn't just financial. When you start thinking in terms of what money can become rather than what money can buy, everything changes. Your decision-making process shifts. Your priorities realign. You start seeing opportunities where you used to see only expenses. This mindset shift affects every area of your life. You become more strategic about career moves because you understand the long-term value of increased income. You become more intentional about major purchases because you can calculate their true opportunity cost. Most importantly, you develop what I call wealth vision, the ability to see beyond immediate gratification to long-term financial outcomes. Now, you might be wondering why more people don't understand this if the math is so straightforward. The answer lies in how our brains are wired. Humans are notoriously bad at understanding exponential growth. We think linearly. If something doubles, we expect it to double again by the same amount rather than by the same percentage. This cognitive limitation makes it nearly impossible to truly grasp the power of compound growth without actually running the numbers. There's also the instant gratification factor that defines modern consumer culture. We're surrounded by messages telling us to buy now, enjoy today, worry about tomorrow later. Credit cards make it easy to spend money we don't have on things we don't need. Meanwhile, investing requires the opposite mindset. It requires delaying gratification today for rewards that won't fully materialize for decades. Said, the financial industry doesn't help matters either. They make investing seem complicated, risky, something that requires special knowledge or large amounts of capital to get started. They use complex terminology and create products with confusing fee structures that discourage regular people from participating. But the truth is, successful investing is actually quite simple. It just requires understanding a few basic principles and having the discipline to stick with them. This is why I decided to break down the real mathematics behind wealth building in a way that anyone can understand. Not theoretical concepts or abstract principles, but actual numbers that show exactly how small, consistent actions create extraordinary results. Because once you see these numbers, once you truly understand what's possible, everything changes. The journey from $100 per week to substantial wealth isn't just about the destination. It's about who you become along the way. The habits you develop, the mindset you cultivate, the confidence that comes from taking control of your financial future. These changes extend far beyond your bank account balance. When I was working in investment banking, I noticed something interesting about my wealthy clients. They didn't necessarily earn more money than other successful people, but they thought about money completely differently. They understood that wealth isn't built through income alone, but through the intelligent deployment of that income over time. They had internalized the mathematical reality that most people never learn. What really fascinated me about these clients was how they viewed money as a tool rather than a goal. They weren't trying to accumulate wealth just to have more stuff. They were building financial systems that would eventually give them something far more valuable than material possessions. They were buying freedom. Freedom from financial stress, freedom to make choices based on what they wanted rather than what they could afford. Freedom to take risks and pursue opportunities that others couldn't even consider. This is where most people get the wealth equation backwards. They think you need to be wealthy first, then you can start thinking like wealthy people. But it's actually the opposite. You start thinking like wealthy people, then you become wealthy. The mindset comes first, the money follows. Let me tell you about Sarah, one of my mentoring clients who perfectly illustrates this principle. When she first came to me 3 years ago, she was a teacher making $42,000 per year. Single mom, 2 kids, living paycheck to paycheck like millions of other Americans. She was convinced that wealth building was something for other people, people with higher incomes or family money or some kind of special advantage she didn't have. But Sarah had one thing going for her that many higher earners don't. She was tired of feeling financially helpless and was willing to learn. We started with her exact situation, her exact income, her exact expenses. No magic, no complicated strategies, just basic mathematics applied to her real life. The first thing we did was find her $100 per week, not by cutting out everything she enjoyed, but by becoming more intentional about where her money was going. She discovered she was spending $60 per week on convenience foods because she was always rushing between work and her kids' activities. Another $30 was going to subscription services she'd signed up for and forgotten about. The remaining 10 came from switching to a cheaper phone plan that offered the same service. Here's what's crucial to understand. Sarah didn't feel deprived making these changes. In fact, she felt empowered. For the first time in years, she felt like she was in control of her money instead of her money controlling her. That psychological shift is absolutely essential because it's what makes the entire system sustainable over time. We set up automatic transfers so that $100 moved from her checking account to her investment account every Friday afternoon. She never saw the money, never had to make the decision to save it. It just happened. Within 6 months, this process had become so natural that she actually increased it to $125 per week as her financial confidence grew. But here's where the story gets really interesting. After 18 months of consistent investing, Sarah's portfolio had grown to about $8,000. Not life-changing money by any stretch, but something started shifting in how she approached other financial decisions. She began asking different questions. Instead of, "Can I afford this?" she started asking, "What will this cost me in terms of my long-term wealth building?" When her car needed major repairs, instead of immediately taking out a loan, she researched whether it made more sense to fix it or replace it with a reliable used car that would serve her needs without derailing her investment plan. When she got a modest raise at work, instead of letting lifestyle inflation eat up the extra income, she automatically increased her investment contributions. These might seem like small decisions, but they represent a fundamental transformation in financial thinking. Sarah had developed what I call compound consciousness. She could see how current choices would affect her future wealth in ways that most people never consider. The really remarkable part of Sarah's story isn't just the money she's accumulated, though that's certainly impressive. It's how her relationship with money has completely changed. She no longer feels anxious about unexpected expenses because she has multiple financial buffers in place. She no longer feels trapped in her current job because she knows she's building toward financial independence. Most importantly, she's teaching these principles to her kids. They're learning about compound growth and investment returns and opportunity cost at ages when most children are just learning that money doesn't grow on trees. She's breaking a generational cycle of financial stress and replacing it with financial literacy and confidence. This is what happens when you understand the true mathematics of wealth building. It's not just about the money you accumulate, though that's certainly important. It's about the person you become in the process, the skills you develop, the confidence you build, the opportunities you create for yourself and your family. But let's get back to the actual numbers, because this is where things get really exciting. That $100 per week that seems so modest, so achievable, so unremarkable, has mathematical properties that most people find almost impossible to believe until they see the calculations themselves. When you invest $100 per week in a diversified portfolio earning an average return of 8% annually, something magical happens. The first year doesn't feel like much. You've put in about $5,000 and your account might be worth $5,200. Nice, but not exactly retirement money. The second year is slightly better. You've contributed another $5,000, but now your previous contributions are also growing. Your account might be worth around $11,000. Still not enough to change your life. But you're starting to see the power of having your money work alongside your contributions. By year 5, things start getting interesting. You've contributed $26,000 total, but your account is worth over $32,000. That extra $6,000 represents money you never had to earn at your job. Money that showed up because your existing investments were growing while you continued adding to them. Year 10 is where most people start to really pay attention. You've contributed $52,000, but your account is now worth over $78,000. You're earning more from investment returns than many people make at their jobs, and it's happening automatically while you sleep. But it's year 15 where the magic really becomes undeniable. Your $52,000 in contributions has grown to over $135,000. You're making more money from your investments than you're contributing from your paycheck. The system has reached a tipping point where your money is doing most of the heavy lifting. By year 20, the numbers become almost surreal. Your 100,000 in total contributions has grown to over $265,000. You've more than doubled your money through nothing but patience and consistency. But we're not done yet. By year 25, something truly extraordinary has happened. Your 125,000 in total contributions has become over $400,000. But here's where most people's brains start to malfunction when they see these numbers. They assume there's some kind of catch, some hidden complexity that makes this impossible for regular people to achieve. The truth is exactly the opposite. This isn't some sophisticated financial strategy available only to the wealthy. This is basic mathematics using investment vehicles that anyone with a smartphone can access in about 15 minutes. The same index funds, the same compound interest, the same market returns that have been creating wealth for decades. What makes this so powerful isn't complexity, it's simplicity. No stock picking, no market timing, no complicated strategies that require constant monitoring. Just consistent contributions to diversified investments that track the overall market's performance. It's so simple that most people dismiss it as too good to be true. But let me tell you about David, another mentoring client who proves this system works regardless of your starting point. When David contacted me 2 years ago, he was 38 years old and had exactly $400 in his savings account. $400 at 38. He'd spent his 20s and 30s living paycheck to paycheck, always telling himself he'd start saving when he made more money or when life calmed down or when some imaginary perfect moment arrived. David worked in construction management, making decent money but never quite enough to feel financially secure. Every time he'd accumulate a few $1,000s, some emergency would wipe it out. Car repairs, medical bills, family obligations. The usual suspects that derail most people's financial plans before they even get started. What changed for David wasn't his income or his circumstances. What changed was his understanding of how wealth actually gets built. We identified his $100 per week by eliminating what he called his stress spending. Instead of grabbing lunch near job sites, he started packing meals. Instead of stopping for drinks after work when projects got frustrating, he found other ways to decompress. Instead of buying tools on impulse when he saw a good deal, he made a list and bought only what he actually needed. Here's what David discovered that surprised him. These changes didn't make his life worse, they made it better. He felt more in control, more purposeful, more optimistic about his future. The money he was investing wasn't money he missed because he'd replaced mindless spending with intentional planning. But David's story has a twist that illustrates something crucial about this entire process. After 8 months of consistent investing, he got laid off when his construction company lost a major contract. This is exactly the kind of situation that derails most people's financial plans. Emergency strikes, they liquidate their investments to cover expenses, they're back to square one. David handled it differently. Because he'd been building his investment account alongside a small emergency fund, he had options. Instead of panicking and cashing out his investments, he used his emergency fund to cover basic expenses while he job hunted. More importantly, because he'd developed confidence in his financial planning abilities, he used the layoff as an opportunity to find a better position rather than just accepting the first offer that came along. When David landed his new job 6 weeks later, it came with a 15% salary increase. Instead of using that extra money to upgrade his lifestyle, he increased his investment contributions to $140 per week. By the time we'd been working together for 18 months, David had accumulated over $12,000 in investments and had completely transformed his relationship with money. This is what happens when you understand that wealth building isn't about having perfect circumstances. It's about building systems that work regardless of what life throws at you. The people who successfully build wealth aren't the ones who never face setbacks. They're the ones who build flexibility and resilience into their financial plans. Now let me address the elephant in the room that everyone's thinking about but afraid to ask. What about market crashes? What happens to your beautiful compound growth when the stock market decides to have one of its periodic meltdowns and your account value drops by 30% overnight? This is where most people's wealth-building plans fall apart, not because of the mathematics, but because of psychology. They see their account balance drop and panic. They sell everything at exactly the wrong time, locking in losses and missing the subsequent recovery. They turn temporary setbacks into permanent damage through emotional decision-making. But here's what experienced investors know that beginners don't. Market crashes aren't wealth destroyers, they're wealth accelerators for people who understand how to respond to them. When you're consistently investing $100 per week and the market drops 30%, something magical happens. Your weekly contributions suddenly buy 30% more shares than they did the previous month. This is called dollar cost averaging, and it's one of the most powerful wealth-building tools available to regular investors. Instead of trying to time the market, which even professional fund managers consistently fail to do, you just keep buying. When prices are high, you buy fewer shares. When prices are low, you buy more shares. Over time, this smooths out market volatility and actually accelerates your wealth accumulation. I lived through the 2008 financial crisis while I was still working on Wall Street, and I watched two completely different responses to the market crash. The wealthy clients who understood long-term investing kept contributing to their portfolios throughout the crisis. They bought more when everyone else was selling. The less experienced investors panicked and liquidated their positions at the worst possible time. Fast forward to today, and guess which group has more wealth? The people who stayed the course didn't just recover from the 2008 crash, they emerged significantly wealthier because they'd accumulated massive positions at depressed prices. The people who panicked and sold are still trying to rebuild what they lost over a decade ago. This psychological resilience is perhaps the most valuable skill you develop when you commit to long-term wealth building. You learn to think in decades rather than months. You develop the emotional discipline to ignore short-term market noise and focus on long-term trends. Most importantly, you learn to see market volatility as opportunity rather than threat. Let me show you what this looks like in practice with actual numbers. Let's say you've been investing $100 per week for 5 years and you've accumulated $50,000. Then the market crashes and your portfolio drops to $35,000. Painful, right? Most people would be tempted to sell and preserve what's left. But if you understand the mathematics of wealth building, you realize this crash just accelerated your timeline to financial independence. That $100 per week that was buying a certain number of shares at higher prices is now buying significantly more shares at lower prices. When the market recovers, and historically it always has, you'll own far more shares than you would have if the crash had never happened. This is exactly what happened to Lisa, a nurse who started investing with me just 18 months before the COVID market crash in March 2020. She'd accumulated about $8,000 when the market dropped by over 30% in a matter of weeks. Instead of panicking, Lisa did something remarkable. She increased her contributions to $150 per week because she understood she was getting shares at a massive discount. When the market recovered over the following year, Lisa's portfolio didn't just return to its previous value, it shot past it. The shares she'd purchased during the crash became some of her most profitable investments. By the end of 2021, her portfolio was worth over $22,000, despite contributing for less than 4 years. Lisa's experience illustrates something crucial about successful investing. The people who build substantial wealth aren't the ones who avoid market crashes. They're the ones who know how to profit from them. They understand that volatility is the price you pay for long-term returns, and they're willing to accept short-term uncertainty in exchange for long-term wealth. This brings us to one of the most important concepts in wealth building that most people never learn: the difference between being rich and being wealthy. Rich people have high incomes. Wealthy people have assets that generate income. Rich people worry about maintaining their lifestyle if they stop working. Wealthy people have systems that support their lifestyle whether they work or not. When you invest $100 per week for 20 or 25 years, you're not just accumulating money, you're building a wealth-generating machine. At some point, probably sooner than you think, the returns from your investments will exceed your weekly contributions. Your money starts making more money than you're adding to the system. This is when everything changes. This is when you transition from someone who trades time for money to someone whose money works independently of their time. This is when you start thinking about early retirement not as a fantasy but as a mathematical inevitability. The exact timeline depends on market performance and your contribution levels, but historically, this transition happens somewhere between year 15 and year 20 for people investing $100 per week. That's when your investment returns begin generating more wealth than your job, even if you never get another raise. Look, the mathematics don't lie. $100 per week becomes life-changing wealth through nothing but time and consistency. Sarah, David, Lisa, and countless others have proven this system works regardless of your starting point or circumstances. The only question left is whether you'll spend the next 20 years wondering what could have been, or building the financial freedom you deserve. Your future self is counting on the decision you make right now,